Okay, this is Salman Soz, and I don't know if you can hear me. I have no way of knowing right now, but I'm assuming you can. I'm a member of the Congress Party, and I'm in the US right now, and it is great to be here with the Indian Overseas Congress to talk about what else. Everybody's talking about the same thing these days. It's COVID-19, and obviously everybody's worried about what might happen in India, and the whole conversation is about this public health emergency, and also about what its impact is going to be on the Indian economy. Now, these concerns are not just expressed in India. These are global concerns, and I think we have to try and make some sense out of them. Now, I see some people already joining. I know that I'm supposed to be taking questions at the end of my kind of introductory kind of remarks. I don't know how that's going to happen because I'm using my mobile phone, and so I have no way. I've never done this. I don't think I've done this. Maybe I've done it once, so I don't really know how this works. I'm hoping that perhaps Dhananjay or Manoj, who are listening, perhaps could send me questions in an email or some other way, because I don't know how I'm going to get these questions. But anyway, let's get to the topic. The topic is lives and livelihoods, right? On the one hand, we worry about the human impact of this disease, and on the other hand, we worry about what happens if there's, obviously there's a lockdown. We know that there are huge losses, and what happens to a country like India, and what can be done to mitigate some of these risks, and ultimately, what does the future hold for countries like India? Let me just first step back and think about what's happening around the world. So, as you may know, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has recently come up with what we call the World Economic Outlook, which is their regular kind of publication. It comes out in April and other months. And the IMF basically has indicated that the economy is going to take the global economy is going to take a major beating, and that we're already in recession. The global economy is, and that this year is going to be a pretty bad year around the world. And what the IMF is actually reflecting is what is happening on the public health side. I don't think, let's be honest, I don't think even in January or February, many people had a sense of what this disease can mean. Over time, we've gotten greater clarity about this disease, but at the same time, even today, months after this crisis started, we still don't have a good handle on what the disease really, how it transmits, how much it transmits, and how dangerous it really is, and what can we do to stop it. There are, people are saying that there are different strains. How does vaccine development take place when you have all these different strains? Is there something else that we can do? Obviously President Trump in the US came up with this idea of getting hydroxychloroquine and mixing it up with an antibiotic, and saying that could really help patients. India exported a lot of that anti-malarial drug to the US. Unfortunately, just yesterday, the governor of New York said that a trial that they ran showed that hydroxychloroquine had no real impact on their patients. Now, this drug obviously is needed in countries like India for things like malaria, and also their patients of rheumatic diseases who need this drug, and this drug is now not readily available in many places. So there are lots of things that are unknown, and people are struggling, and people are trying to grasp at whatever miracle cure comes their way. In fact, yesterday President Trump again talked about ingesting disinfectants, which is crazy. But what we've seen since this disease struck is that around the world, containment measures of a variety of types have been put in place, and this is and now in India, obviously, for the last month, there's a very severe lockdown. What does that actually do? And that is essentially what you've been seeing, that in the US, for example, where the lockdown is not really like the India lockdown. I'm here, I can go to the grocery stores and get groceries, there's social distancing, etc., etc. But even here, despite the fact that people can work online and, you can go out to the grocery store, some of the businesses are running, even here, in a matter of 4 weeks, I think about 25 million people have lost their jobs. And the US has a very robust unemployment insurance system. So people lose their jobs, they can apply for unemployment benefits. And because they've applied, we know that 25 million people have lost jobs in 4 or 5 weeks, which is a crazy number. Country after country in the richer world, they've come up with massive fiscal stimulus packages. Basically, the government is spending money. And in the US, it was $2 trillion initially, now another $500 billion. Italy was thinking of something like 750 billion euros. So massive amounts of money, either through the government side or through the central bank side, like the Federal Reserve in the US put in about a package which was almost like a $3 trillion package. So there's a lot of money in the Western world which is being thrown at this problem. They're trying to stave off a total disaster. Now, in India's case, and you must have seen that in India, the caseload has been relatively low compared to, countries in Europe, countries like the US. The caseload has been relatively low. Now, there is no real there's no real explanation for this right now. People are trying to figure out why it is that in countries like India, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, the caseload is relatively low, despite the fact that the population is very high in these countries, high population density countries, weak health systems, we have high malnutrition rates. Still, the caseload is low. Some people say that perhaps it is because of limited testing. Others say that maybe it's because of climatic conditions. Or some others say that these are younger countries, in the sense that, in Europe and even in America, the demographic profile is such that there are more older people here than in countries like India and Pakistan. Okay, I think there's already... yes, I'm going to get to the questions soon. So, the problem, I think, is that we don't really know enough. What we do seem to know is that this thing is going to take a while before it gets better. And even when the lockdown is lifted, if it is lifted in India on May 3rd, which would be 5 weeks from the initial lockdown announcement, and now there are some relaxations now. What we know is that this has had an impact. Now, what kind of an impact, and what does it do to countries like India? So if in the US, 25 million people lost their jobs in 5 weeks, in India, the unemployment rate has basically shot up. According to the Center for Monitoring the Indian Economy, CMIE, I think the unemployment rate is close to 24% right now. It was at about 6 to 7% before the crisis really struck. Now, this This is huge, and people have to understand that when when the IMF says that India's economy is now going to grow at a rate of 1.8% in 2020, while some others are saying that it's going to be more like 0%. you know, for countries like India, that is really, really bad. And the reason is, when you're a poorer country, you need to grow faster, right? I mean, because it's a small economic base, on that growth should be higher. That is why countries like India and China were growing at a fast pace, and they have not been growing as fast more recently, and this will actually be devastating. To actually understand what is happening now, I think we should step back and look at what was happening in two other crises that India faced. And in one case it was the world, in the other case it was India by itself. In 2008, after the Lehman Brothers crisis started, the what we call the Great Recession or the global financial crisis, that was essentially a crisis that started in the wealthier countries, in the real estate sector and in the banking sector. And then it started getting exported to different places. But countries like India and China did not suffer as much. Why? Because India especially, the connections to the global economy, to the capital markets, to the financial markets, was still limited. India was not as integrated with capital markets at that time. So India didn't take that big of a hit at that time. Yes, the GDP growth slowed down considerably to just over 3% in 2008, but then recovered because of fiscal. There were the government pumped in some money. The Reserve Bank of India came in as well, and I think the impact was less at that time. Then the second reference point we should keep in mind is the 2016 demonetization. Now, what demonetization did is it did have a serious impact on the informal economy, the cash-based economy, which is a big chunk of the Indian economy, and that, plus some other policy measures like a very complex goods and services tax in 2017, had a slowing down impact on the Indian economy. Plus, we have problems in the banking sector which have not really fully been addressed. Investment has been low, and what do you know? The economy had been slowing for some time now. The economy has been slowing in such a way that the government's own revenues are consistently now short of their targets. That means, if you think about this particular crisis versus the crisis in 2008, the big difference is that in 2008 the economy was still strong, was growing before the crisis in 2008, was growing fast, and the government had enough wiggle room to actually support the economy during a global crisis. This time, the problem is that the Indian economy is pretty weak and has been slowing down for some years now, and the government's finances are frankly in a mess, and this crisis is hitting India in a much bigger way than the 2008 crisis, because this is what we call, I think, no side of the economy is left untouched. And this is not just a domestic problem, this is a global problem. And right now, the Indian economy is much more integrated with the global economy than it was in 2008. What that does is, you have a global problem, then you have your local problem, because your supply and demand demand was already weak, supply is now cut off because of the lockdown, and suddenly you have a collapsing kind of economy, and the government doesn't have many degrees of freedom to really do much in terms of saying we'll throw money at it. The government did come up with an initial relief package, which was about 0.8% of GDP, which I think was a step in the right direction, but obviously it falls way short of what is needed. So what do we do? What can we do about this situation? So, I like to kind of think about this as a near-term challenge, and then really looking at this crisis with some, and saying, can we use this crisis? Because this crisis hopefully will come to an end at some point. Can we use this crisis to create opportunities for the future? So that is in some ways, what can we do for the long term? Now, in the short term, I think we have a couple of things that I think there are. Governments in India, the state governments and the central government, they are trying to do certain things. But I think we have to recognize that India's capacity, the capacity of the government, whether at the central level or the state level, is still very limited. It is one thing to kind of say that, we're like this global power and all that stuff, but the reality of government capacity is that it is pretty limited, pretty weak. And you can see that from the way we've approached this crisis. Now, the first confirmed case in the US was on January 20th or 21st, or somewhere around that time. In India, it was around January 30th. The entire month of February was pretty much taken up either by President Trump's visit, which took up a lot of mind space in India. Then there were these riots in Delhi. Before that, there was this NPR and NRC and all these kind of protests about that. So in the month of February, I don't think really anything massive, major happened in terms of being prepared for what was to come. And everybody, I think in February, people had started getting a sense that this was already becoming a serious problem in other countries and was likely to spread. Much of March was also, if you look at the first half of March, I don't really, there was a task force that was set up by the government and all that, but I didn't really get a sense that there was a lot of preparation. In fact, on March 18th, the government decided that international, plane arrivals would stop. But by that time, if you remember, many European countries had seen an explosion of cases. Some were real big hotspots, and people were still coming from these places. And a thermal scanner is not going to tell you everything there is to know about this disease, because you may not have a fever, you may be asymptomatic, and you may still be carrying the disease. In fact, just 2 days back, the New York Times reported that when the first American case was confirmed, health experts are estimating that there were already 10,000 cases in the US. Now that just tells you you have one confirmed case, but 10,000 other cases that were undetected. Now imagine up to March 18th, you're getting all these people from outside, and you've just not really created the kind of infrastructure that is needed to deal with this problem. Now, be that as it may, most governments in the world, except for a few, especially in Southeast Asia, most were, totally unprepared for this, including the US. The US has become almost like a laughingstock in some ways for the response to this disease. But that does not absolve, Indian policymakers of their own responsibilities. They have a responsibility. Nobody can take shelter under the excuse that look at the US or look at, nobody cares about the US or Europe. What you care about is what are you doing for people? And of course, at some point, the government decided that they needed to take harsh measures, even though the caseload at that time was very low. But I think the government must have been told by their experts that the caseload may be low because of whatever testing strategy they were following, but they must have suspected that this was going to become a big problem. So they decided to go in for a massive lockdown. And now we are where we are. But I think, obviously India's lockdown is to my mind, among the harshest in the world. And the question is, one basic thing to keep in mind is that if we, say in India, shut down the economy for a certain period of time, the impacts of that are going to be very different from the impacts in, say, the Western world, right? You cannot just say that, okay, the US is shutting down, or the UK is shutting down, or actually UK didn't do a good job of shutting down anyway, or Italy or whatever, and India should follow the same strategy, because every country's context is different. And we've already seen that after the first, as soon as the shutdown started, at 4 hours notice, mind you, we had all these poor migrant workers caught in other states. No fault of theirs. Not a disease that they brought to India. They are kind of victims totally, and they're just walking listlessly, trying to get home. And even today, almost a month after that time, many people are still trying to walk home. They're still trying to walk home. Some people are, it's a very sad situation. But you see, policymakers should be thinking through the consequences of their actions. I still feel that we still are not prepared. Now, if you have a lockdown, you have to kind of think about what you're going to. If the lockdown gives you some time, it gives you an opportunity to prepare for what is to come after the lockdown. I really hope that the government has actually boosted the preparedness of our health infrastructure. That means more testing, more tracing. Not just more, just robust tracing, quarantining, isolation, and then monitoring and using technology, whatever. I just hope that they've done this, because without that, I think the disease will spread, will spread a lot more than obviously what it would spread in terms of through a lockdown. So the important thing is, I hope that the government has, because the government has made a huge investment in one way, and that is, when you have a lockdown, today I was reading some estimates of the MSME sector, which is the micro, small, and medium enterprises, and the estimate is that they're losing about 30,000 crores, which is about $4 billion a day. Now, the Indian economy has been largely shut for the last 1 month, okay? So even if you take 50% of as the shutdown of the economy, what that means is it's a huge amount of money in some ways that India has poured into this problem. What are we getting back for that money? What are we getting for shutting down the Indian economy or vast sections of this Indian economy for a month? What we should be getting is the kind of preparedness that would help us reopen the economy in either phases, or by geographical targeting, or by some other means, so that you don't really shut down the whole thing. Because if you shut down the whole thing in a country like India, the consequences can be catastrophic. Why? Because we still have hundreds of millions of people who are poor, extremely poor, and another hundreds of millions of people who are vulnerable to falling back into poverty. Remember the time, when we talked about, we used to talk about poverty reduction in India and China, and India had done a great job. But just because you move up above the poverty line doesn't mean that you're not susceptible to falling back into poverty. In fact, an analysis by the Mint newspaper just recently indicated that between 2011-12 and 2017-18, rural poverty has shot up. And that obviously is linked to weaker growth. Now, if you shut down the economy as we have, that means there is going to be, obviously growth is going to drop precipitously. And it is not that easy to just regenerate that economic activity, okay? It takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of time. So I think that I'm hopeful that the government has thought these things through, not just at the central government level, but also the state government, at the level of state governments. But state governments are also suffering, by the way. They don't have money because many have not been given their GST shares or whatever. So I think state government finances are also in very difficult shape. Now, what is to be done? I think in the short term, to some extent, I think the government has been, talking about ration, giving people food, and for 3 months they said, we'll give you maybe extra food rations so that people don't go hungry. I think that is important. That's a good step. But I understand that in some places this is not working well. The PDS, the public distribution system, is not working well. And on the other hand, some economists are saying that, look, I mean, the government has surplus food and they should be basically announcing things in such a way that people are not at all worried about food insecurity. So I think partly it is how do you distribute food, and partly it is making sure that you tell people that, look, do not worry. Your food needs will be taken care of. Don't worry, your children will not suffer. But what do we see? We see people in long queues trying to go and collect ration. I don't know. I think in this day and age, one would have hoped that with Aadhaar and with other tech, we could actually deliver food to people so that they don't have to go out in this crushing heat and lift these sacks of food and then take them home. I mean, I sometimes feel that it's easy for us, people who are well off, people who are middle class, upper middle class, or the wealthy. It's so much easier for us. But all the sacrifices are to be borne by people who are, already living a miserable life. They have such a tough life. And we want them to sacrifice even more. And for a disease that they had nothing to do with. I don't understand it. I don't. Maybe you guys do. I don't understand it. It's really, it's shocking to me how almost careless we have become about lives of people. Why can't we find ways? Why can't the government, and this is not like the central government has to do everything. There are state governments, there are municipalities, there are local governments, there are punches, sarpanches. Why not take this as an opportunity for decentralization and let that system work? So if we could somehow not create additional burdens for poor people, that would be wonderful. The other thing we really, again, I said that we're hoping that the government has taken care of the health side of things, using this 1 month period as time to kind of set things straight. If they haven't, then, I think then the biggest problem that I foresee is hunger. I think hunger, destitution, and possibly death. I think that is going to grow because of the lockdown. The lockdown can be meaningful if we have taken this time to improve things. Now, the other thing is cash transfers, right? I mean, the government has the infrastructure in some ways to deliver cash to people. We have Narega, we have Jan Dhan Yojana, we have all these different things by which you can actually identify who are the people who can be given cash, so that they are secure, so that they know that they have help. This would be an investment right now in doing cash transfers at this time for people who are either poor or vulnerable to falling into poverty. I think cash transfers are a very good way, and India does have a structure in place. Of course, the government can say that we don't have a lot of money right now, but I know that the government is wasting a lot of money on so many things. It's incredible how much, in the middle of this disease, in the middle of this, not disease, this is a once in a lifetime crisis. You have money for all sorts of idiotic projects, sorry to say. And you're not putting enough money in, up there for poor people who we owe these people. They didn't do this. They cannot suffer because, we are either incompetent or we are uncaring. Poor people cannot suffer, and I think that is, it actually infuriates me, and maybe that's why you're seeing a little bit of emotion here. Then comes the other part of the economy, which is the private sector. Especially the micro, basically the small businesses. That really employ a lot of people in informal economy. Now, a lot of people are going to basically lose jobs, lost them already. Businesses are likely to shut down, and the problem with that is, it's not as if you can shut down the business for 2-3 months and then say, okay, I'm going to go back to normal. It doesn't work like that. It's very difficult to do that, and so I think at this stage the government must really figure out a way in which you take money and you create an opportunity for subsidizing wage payments. I don't know. I mean, there are lots of ideas. One of the ideas could be that you take small businesses and basically tell them, look, let's create a partnership between the government, the business, and the employees. And you tell the employees that, you know what, we cannot give you the full salary, but we can give you enough so that you survive through this thing. But you keep working so that the business survives. Because if the business survives, their future livelihood survives. And the government's investment will not be total, because the government can say that the business is taking a bit of the hit, the government is taking a bit of the hit, and the employee is taking a bit of the hit. That's one idea, but there could be so many others. I'm just saying that we need to find creative ways so that small businesses do not end up shutting down en masse. Because if that happens, that can fuel this cycle of crisis. And this can actually spiral into a full-blown kind of longer-term recession. It may. I think many people do not pay enough attention to what happens because of recessions and because of these shocks. The IMF did a study of almost 190 countries where they actually looked at the impact of shocks on economies and during recessions. And what they found was that some output, some economic activity, some part of it is actually lost forever. It does not come back during these kinds of events. So basically, you have a pizza, and then because of a shock, a slice of the pizza is gone. There's no way to grow that pizza slice back. That is gone forever. Now, many of the people who are in the US probably remember that in 2008, the 2008 crisis that I spoke about earlier. In 2018, the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, which is part of the Federal Reserve System, the central bank in the US, had a study which basically said that 10 years after that crisis, America's economy had still not recovered the output it would have had that crisis not happened. That means a chunk, not an insignificant chunk of the American economy was gone. America had still not recovered that 10 years after the crisis. The longer you wait to do something about this crisis, the deeper the problem is going to be. I think that is a lesson for policymakers. That is a lesson for our government. And this is a lesson from around the world. The sooner you tackle this, the sooner you make the investments, the better it is. If you think that, oh, dekha jayega, we'll see how things go, maybe we'll do it later, I think that's going to be a problem. If you want to invest, this is the time to invest. And I think government of India and all the state governments, they put their heads together, they can find a lot of money. I mean, the government just announced the Central Vista project in Delhi, 25,000 crore rupees. Who cares about it right now? Everything should be on the table. Every bit of money that can be saved to be put into this crisis should be thought about now. There is money. I've worked quite a bit in India, so I know there's a lot of money. There's a lot of waste. You can find things. You just have to be willing to do that. Okay? So we should basically make a commitment that we will. In fact, this was a question from Rajendra Dichapalli. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. So you talk about out of the box thinking. You can have out of the box thinking if you're prepared to think. right? I mean, if you're prepared to think, you can do wonders. But so far, what I've seen is, the focus on the lockdown. Okay, I understand it, but now the true test will be what has the government done to actually ease the lockdown on a regular basis? Have they taken the steps that are needed? So time will tell. But there is money, but it must be invested, and small businesses need to be saved. If they're not saved, this will become a much bigger crisis than it already is. As it is even today, right now, if everything improved, say COVID-19 is finished. Everybody says today on the 25th of April, COVID-19 is finished worldwide. Magic. Even then, the Indian economy is in deep trouble because of what has happened in the last couple of months. Deep, deep trouble. We still need to invest in this economy now. The sooner we do it, the better it is. Find the money, and they can find the money. If they wait, I think we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And when I say we, in fact, frankly, everybody's going to be in trouble. Even white-collar people will lose jobs. But the hardest impacts are going to be on poor people in India. Please keep that in mind. But every crisis has one silver lining, and that is it gives you an opportunity to kind of think about things differently. And this crisis is unique in that sense. It is affecting India and the world in so many different ways that we should be now thinking of doing things that were possibly unthinkable to policymakers some time back. For example, I'm assuming that I'm live. If I'm live, can you please send me a message that I'm live? Okay, I'm live again. Sorry. I think I went to WhatsApp to see what the question was. I'm so sorry. So, economic reforms have just not happened under this government for the most part. And I think even their supporters would agree. And why that is the case is, I think maybe the government is not reformist. It was never a reformist government. I mean, I've written a book about it, but there's always hope. So what you hope for is that we change. We really must change. In a number of areas, we really need some totally out-of-the-box thinking. We should be doing things which might appear crazy to most people, because India faces some considerable challenges. And this was before COVID-19. Right now we're talking about COVID-19 and the problem it's kind of creating. Maybe COVID-19 is waking us up. And what do I mean by that? Remember that remember that thing called climate change? Nobody's talking about climate change right now, but we should, because it can give you an idea of what is to come. And we should not get caught off guard like we have been in this particular case. So I'll read to you a bit from, there's a New Yorker magazine writer, David Wallace Wells. He wrote a very crazy piece on climate change in 2017. Then he wrote a book, which is now a bestseller. And he wrote about India also, but he wrote about climate change in general. He wrote about India. And he writes that at 2 degrees Celsius warming, an additional 400 million people will suffer from water scarcity. Major cities in the equatorial band of the planet will become unlivable. And even in the northern latitudes, heat waves will kill thousands each summer. There would be 32 times as many extreme heat waves in India, and each would last 5 times as long, exposing 93 times more people. So this is just one of the predictions for India. I mean, the World Bank has done a study where they say that India is going to be the worst affected, country as far as climate change is concerned. I mean, we have water scarcity problems. I mean, we have heat waves, we have massive flooding, and this is only going to go worse. Shouldn't our policymakers be now using this opportunity to actually, when we have to revive the economy, invest? Why shouldn't we be investing in different things now? Shouldn't we be building our economy in a different way? What other opportunity does one want? We are basically in a very, very tough situation. This is the time, I would say, to say, create an opportunity out of this crisis. Use this crisis as an opportunity, as we did in 1991. The 1991 crisis was a massive crisis for India. And then we had a government which was not the strongest government at that time, and came up with reforms that actually catapulted India into a period of strong growth and high poverty reduction. Why not think of this in a similar way? We can and we must. There are so many things that we need to do. I mean, you have technology kind of disruption around the world, and we have a lot of people who are do not receive a good education, are not skilled, are not able to fend for themselves, are not healthy because our health infrastructure is so weak. We spend so little on health. When will we listen to people like Amartya Sen and say we must invest more in health and education? When? If not now. Because in the future, people will have to be resilient themselves in order to survive. On the one hand, you'll have machines taking up jobs and whatnot, but at the same time, ultimately, it'll be the genius of people who will actually kind of keep themselves going. If you have 40% malnutrition, and by the way, I'm not suggesting that if you have malnutrition in India, it's a Modi problem or a BJP problem. This has existed for a while. Why don't we create a mission mentality about nutrition? If you do not get enough nutrition, how do you expect those children to grow up and study well and then develop skills and fend for themselves in the future? They won't be productive. It's basic. I don't understand. It's shocking that we don't focus enough on that. Honestly, I've heard more about the bullet train than about malnutrition in India. I've heard more about the Sardar Patel statue than about stunting in India. I've heard more about the Central Vista now than about what we can do to deliver food to people who are going hungry. Not ask them to come and get your food, deliver it to them. We owe it, the country owes it to them. So, there are a host of areas where we can kind of think of new things, whether it's building a totally new health system, and we can learn a lot from other countries that have done this. Whether it's education and making sure that we heed the warnings of eminent people, social scientists who have said that we really must do more with education. MSMEs. I mean, we never let our small businesses grow to big businesses. The incentives are such that you basically cut them off at their knees. You don't let them grow. You've got to get out of their way. I personally think, this is my view, not the Congress Party's view, this is my view, that if we unleash people and their creativity and their ability to do well for themselves, we just get out of their way, they will do it. It's a very simple thing. If your business is growing and they can employ more people, there'll be fewer people looking to the government for opportunities. And the government should not be in the business of everything. In India, the government is in every business you can imagine, and also now in kitchens, in bedrooms, whatever. I mean, what kind of a system are we? I mean, that is not a system that we want, and that is not in fact, this is the time to dismantle that system. That system must be dismantled now. People should be given freedom to do things. Freedom to do things. And we consistently are taking people's freedom of, so many ways. I'm not talking about just religion. I'm just talking about even business. Here we're talking about economics. Let people work. Okay? And what the government should be doing is saying, we'll focus on a few things. We'll focus on that and do it really well. We'll try and create public infrastructure where it is needed, where the private sector might find it very hard to do business. And we will ensure those things work so that you can do your work. That's the platform that we need from the government. We don't want the government to become our daddy or mommy. That is not the role of the government. Okay? And it seems to me that there is a significant population in India that wants government to be the mommy or daddy. We can't have that. And this crisis is exactly the time to kind of dismantle that old system. If you want a 21st century kind of powerhouse India, the only way to do that is actually using this crisis and changing structures and reforming institutions and modes of economic activity in ways that we always dreamt of but never really kind of had the courage to do. I don't really understand what it will take because you would think that with a prime minister who is so powerful, has such a large majority in parliament, that he would say, you know what, he would tell people, and he communicates so effectively, he could tell people, you know what, we are in a very difficult time. This is the time to kind of take this crisis and build an opportunity out of it. We should not be under any illusion. And I know people say this. We should not be under any illusion that just because China is being kind of targeted right now for whatever, and all economic activity, that people have invested in from outside in China, that is going to be taken away. I don't think it works that way. China is deeply integrated with global supply chains, and it'll be hard for countries to kind of just take their business elsewhere. Some business will be taken elsewhere, but India should not think that India is going to get that business automatically. That would be a mistake. Because people want to invest in places where there's stability, where there's stability in terms of what the policy framework is, and there's stability in terms of how society is. In India, the policy framework is not stable at all. That is why people are worried about investing in India, because sometimes you have this rule and sometimes you have that rule. Just recently, Vodafone almost was brought to its knees because of, to my mind, really weird kind of policy. But it's not just the policy part of it, it's also about how our society is functioning. In a society where you have protests about people worrying about their citizenship rights, people worrying about communal violence, I think investors would say, should I really be investing in a place that seems so unstable? Honestly, it's very, very, it's simple. I'd rather go somewhere else, even if it's a dictatorship, if they can provide some stability to me. And I think while Indian democracy is a great asset, but I think what if we do not watch out, what we can get is not a democracy, but not just losing parts of our democratic culture, but also creating the kind of instability that will make everybody scared. Not just foreign investors, even domestic investors would be scared to invest. And in some ways, a lot of the investment problem you see in India is because domestic investors are also worried about investing there. All right. So let me see. Somebody, Rachna had a question earlier, and I think Dhananjay, somebody, let me see. Rachna had a question, and I think it was about small businesses too. And I know Nile is asking about forgivable loans. Should the government? Okay, so the loan problem. You see, I mean, people have taken loans. Small businesses, big businesses, everybody's taken loans, and obviously, when you have no economic activity, how are you going to pay that money back? The RBI has come up with a moratorium for 3 months, and it seems to me that those loan repayments will come, will have to be made after 3 months along with interest. I don't know how that's going to work, frankly. I think the banking system is already pretty weak. And so we have to understand the consequences of what is going on. On the one hand, say you have a business and it's not generating any revenues. and but its loan repayments are coming due, and you may get a couple of months, 2-3 months of freeze, but ultimately it is a loan. Now, if you're not paying back the loans because you don't have any money, the banks basically will say, okay, what are we going to do? We don't have any money. Then the depositors of the banks will say, hey, I need my money. I'm going to withdraw some money. And the bank will say, I'm not getting money from the other side. My non-performing assets, although right now they won't classify them as non-performing assets, but in reality, those are non-performing assets. They'll start shooting up. And so there could be serious problems, much more serious problems for the banking sector. And that is why I say that whatever the government has to do, don't do it later. Do it now. Do it now and forestall this crisis. Because if you wait, this is going to compound. These problems are going to compound and they'll become much bigger. It'll be much harder for you to deal with them later. That is a basic lesson in all of this. I'm not saying that go and just, kuwe mein chhalang maro. No, not like that. But right now, if your businesses are not going to stay viable, that means your banks are basically stuck with those loans. Now, the banks, and if these loans are secured loans, what is the bank going to do? Say you mortgage your property to get a loan. So then you tell the bank, okay, I don't have anything. You take if you want, take my collateral. What are they going to do? I mean, they're going to take that collateral and try to sell that to whom? Who's going to buy? So I think this is a very serious problem. Unfortunately, no easy answers for that. But again, I say that the government has plenty of opportunities to consolidate resources for this crisis. They just have to start looking. They have to have a team of states. There should be a team of state and central government officials, and they should be looking at everything. Everything should be on the table. Everything should be on the table. The entire budget process has to be, and it has to be done in a coordinated way. Normally, when you have a global crisis, we talk about how the global, wealthy countries and poor countries and international institutions like the World Bank, IMF should get together to come up with a solution. In India, we should have a similar thing where the central government and the state governments come together along with institutions like the RBI and banks and associations of businesses, and they should come together and say, how can we have a coordinated way of dealing with this crisis? I don't see that happening. Can we break the bank, as it were, print and devalue the rupee and it's Mohan, my friend Mohan is actually saying, should we just devalue the rupee? The thing is, at this stage, like I said, all options are on the table or should be on the table, Mohan. Because, yes, there will be, of course, there will be inflationary spikes. I'd be shocked if there is no inflation right now because, obviously, lots of things are, we'll face shortages. But, whatever happens, we have to say to ourselves that we've got to minimize the damage. Now, can it be done? I think it can be done. Because what you do is you say, let us throw money at this problem right now, but in a way, okay, just a second. There's a question also from Rashna. Salary cuts and even job losses have already started happening in India. Is there any other the government can actually do, according to you, to help safeguard jobs? Something like an industry-wise risk and loss assessment. Yes, that's what in fact, all of this is what I'm talking about. Mohan's question and your question, they're linked. If this were a problem of one part of the economy, then you could deal with it that way. But this is not. This is a systemic, the entire system is involved right now. So what I find missing in India is a coordinated effort. I don't see coordination at all. I'm in the US, but I'm a very close, I observe the Indian economy and Indian politics very carefully. You need stakeholders from all of these places to come together and discuss things, right? And I don't see that. I don't see that happening at all. If you do not put all of these people together, how would you come up with a solution? It's not like Salman Soz is going to come up with a solution, but all by himself, because I don't know all the industry, all of the industry kind of industries and all of the different sectors, and I'm not an expert in everything. Similarly, Mr. Modi is not an expert in everything, or a chief minister is not an expert in everything. But what you do is you take different organs of the government at the central and the state level, take institutions like the RBI and the banks and industry associations and also the political opposition. This is not a crisis, by the way, where you just say, oh, opposition, you stay away. We don't have to deal with you. The Congress party represents 20 crore voters in India. We have a right to look out for the interests of the people of India. Everybody should be involved. You have to be inclusive at this time because this is a crisis that is going to overwhelm any single entity. So I hope the government listens to that. And you people should put some pressure on the government. Everybody should be talking about how we need a coordinated response, just like we do at the global level. We should have that at the India level. There is a question from Vijay: should India stop relying on China and increase India's manufacturing sector? Well, that's the issue right now. This is the time, going forward, as I said, that we must put everything on the table, including how do we really improve our own productivity. But, you can't improve manufacturing if you do not actually also improve the environment in which manufacturing takes place. You can't improve manufacturing if your workforce is not appropriately skilled, is not healthy. So, there is no magic bullet here. The government of India under Mr. Modi or even under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, they've been trying to kind of increase the share of manufacturing in the economy. But, we need some fundamental changes. Without that, just by saying that we have an aspirational target of 25% of GDP should be manufacturing, it will not happen because the world has moved on. We're talking about the fourth industrial revolution right now. The old days are gone. Now, if we could use this opportunity, this crisis as an opportunity to come up with something totally different, maybe. But we need to think differently. We need to kind of give up on these ideas that, like I said earlier, that Vijaya, that just because China may be taking a hit doesn't mean that India is going to be the beneficiary. There are other countries who are fighting for share. It's not like, there's Vietnam, there's Bangladesh, there's so many other countries are getting a share of the pie. So, but India has to fight hard and smartly about this. But do I see the kind of policy framework? Not right now. But the hope is that maybe this crisis is used as an opportunity. I'm looking at a question from Vinayak Khare, and it says, in India there are millions of shopkeepers. They can't pay rents, right, during lockdown since they have no income. How can this problem be solved? Okay. Can you, Dhananjay, can you guys see me? Oh, okay. And then is there something NRIs can do at individual levels to reduce distress in India? Okay. The question was about, let's see. About shopkeepers. The question on shopkeepers is, they can't pay rent. Of course they can't pay rent. They don't have any income. So I think at this stage, some countries have done this. They've said that you cannot collect rent at this point. And by the way, it's not as if those who own the properties don't know that there is a problem in the economy. And it's not as if they can just go out and say, I'll kick this person out because he's not paying my rent and I'll get somebody new. Nobody new is going to come in. So it would be in the best interest of the landlord or the landlady and the tenant to kind of say, you know what, we'll have a freeze on rent because, we're all in trouble right now. Or as soon as, my store opens, I can start kind of paying you rent from that time. That could be an understanding, or the government can kind of, set a kind of a rule. Because right now, nobody can kind of say, I'm going to just get somebody else to rent my place. So I think it's in everyone's interest, and people have to understand it, and that's where people have to talk. You have to communicate all these things to people right now. Okay, supply chain is broken. What are the measures the government should take to revive this? The supply chain is broken, but not completely. In some places, it is working, and somehow people have figured out how to continue doing business. But groceries and other things, I think that's still working, not as well as it should, given the scale of this crisis. It is kind of it is where we are where we are. What can I don't think we were prepared. Nobody was, actually, for the most part. But what we should do is use this opportunity to modernize our supply chain. Like I said, this is a crisis. We take this crisis and actually say, do the kinds of things. People used to talk about, modernizing the food supply chain. This is a great time to do that now for the future. Right now, what the government should be doing is basically making sure that the communication about rules is clear. It seems to me that what happened during demonetization is being repeated now. The government comes up with one announcement, then they go and they start doing clarifications, and I was reading today that they said now barber shops cannot stay open. They were only talking about those shops being open where you sell the equipment for barber shops, I think, which is kind of insane if you think about it. But if the government could just put out things that they had thought through, that would be wonderful, because that can remove a lot of uncertainty from these disruptions that you talk of in the supply chains. The problem is that we had a lockdown, and police people were basically told to be police people, and they started using their danda for everything. Meanwhile, it wasn't always clear what is essential, what is not essential, who can move, who cannot move, when can they move, and when can they not move. So I think in a crisis, communication is extremely important. In the US, obviously, President Trump goes in front of TV pretty much every day. I give him credit for that. Of course, he says totally crazy things at times, which I think can be harmful to public health. But at least the US leadership goes out in front of the media every day and takes some very, I must say, very tough questions. In India, we've basically given charge to some bureaucrats and said, you deal with the media and the people. I don't think that's helpful. In a democracy, I think those who are accountable to the people should be responding and should be communicating very effectively. There has to be a communication strategy for something like this. You have communication strategies for launching a soap. Why can't think about it. If you're in the FMCG, the fast-moving consumer goods industry, you're always kind of saying, okay, we're going to launch this product and we'll have a communication strategy around it. We have a massive existential crisis going on, and it seems to have no strategy. If we had a strategy, the supply chain questions that you had would be very, very, it would be much easier, I think. The disruptions would be less so. Then, let's see, question from Ramesh Kulkarni. Onions were rupees 200 per kg in February, but now they're being thrown on the road in Maharashtra. Since they don't have any value, how do we tackle the situation to help farmers? Farmers have been poor. They've always kind of taken a beating in India. But I think part of the reason is that we have not found a way to communicate with farmers about the reality of what is going on. This is not just about this crisis. It's just about agriculture in general. We are, our productivity is very low, and there are so many people employed in the farm sector. And we're producing a lot of food, and of course, because of these because the supply chain is the way it is, sometimes you have high prices, and sometimes they just are just totally finished. Now, it is easy for us to say that there should be fewer farmers working and there should be higher productivity. The problem is that we have nowhere. If the farmers had somewhere to go to work, they had alternatives, then they would go. They would make that decision for themselves and their families. But they don't. They don't see any opportunities elsewhere. If they don't see these opportunities, if we are unable to create these opportunities, they will remain in this situation. So we can modernize our food supply chain, and that can improve matters for them, not in this crisis, certainly. But, this is not the first crisis they face. They face a crisis pretty much every year. What we can do is, if we really care for them, is that we will, one, modernize the supply chain, and make real investments in it, invite investments in it. The other thing we should be doing is looking at how do we actually create incentives and opportunities for farmers to move out of farming so that they can do something more productive for themselves and their families. Right now, there are no opportunities because the economy is structured the way it is. But we keep doing the same stuff and we expect different results. I don't think that's going to happen. If you keep repeating the same strategy, you'll get the same results. And that is what is happening in India for a long time now. Okay, so there's another question. Rosemary Mayalil. I'm sorry, I think I may have Rose. To what extent can government resort to deficit financing at this time? What will be the long-term effects of such steps? Deficit financing right now is, there's no other way. They have to do it. And there can be consequences, but not doing it can have even bigger consequences. So, it is a tough choice in some ways, but in some other ways, it's a very easy choice. Because if you don't do something now, the problems are going to be much bigger later on. Mohan again says, so the conversation in the US is very much around lives versus livelihoods, but the Indian media is obsessed with Hindu-Muslim issues, lynchings, and finger-pointing. How is India being viewed by the world right now? Are we viewed as a country doing the right things? Are we on course to flatten the curve? Yes, there is this lives versus livelihoods kind of debate everywhere, and to some extent in India as well. But, it is more acute, I think, for countries like India. It is much more visceral. It's much more real because poverty can be debilitating. And, when you have economic growth and poverty have a very deep connection, especially in countries like India, where we don't really have good social protection measures or systems. But unfortunately, what I see in India, and I don't, of course, many parts of the world have some problem or the other around, governments trying to usurp more power than they should and all that stuff. But in India, this whole business of Hindu, Muslim, etc., I think it has really damaged India's reputation. In fact, this is not just during this crisis, but over the last many months, I've been struck by how much negative coverage I've seen of India. I've lived in the US for over 20 years. Never in my life, never in these 20 years have I seen such negative coverage of India. Because of a variety of things, starting with Kashmir, and then this whole Citizenship Amendment Act and the Citizenship Registry, it has taken a real beating. And the soft power that India created a lot of goodwill with, I think that is much diminished. Frankly, India is not that big a hard power to kind of impose its will on the world. Soft power was doing the kind of job that China was always finding hard to do, and I think we may have given up, unfortunately, that soft power, and we are nowhere close to being the hard power that China is. And the other problem is that the economy is in such a bad shape that I think it's creating a major problem for India. I think that this is This is what I meant when I said that people, when they want to invest and do things, they look at the totality of a country. So I know that in India, especially with the media being so pro-government, people are kept in some ways uninformed of what is happening in the rest of the world. But I think India's image has taken a beating. It's very unfortunate. And India has given up, I think, its soft power. The one, I think, lever that India had to actually really distinguish itself from China. I think India has actually, India's democracy, the values of plurality, Bollywood, and all this stuff. I think that has given way to this Hindutva and Hindu-Muslim stuff, and lynchings and stories about that and discrimination. I think India must correct its course. Otherwise, it's going to be a long-term. This is going to be a long-term problem, I think, internationally. Okay. There's one. Sachin Sarate is asking about PM Cares Fund. Okay, and well, PM Cares is it's a totally crazy concoction. We have for the longest time we've had the Prime Minister's National Relief Fund, and instead of requesting funds for that fund, the Prime Minister came up with an acronym which suggests that he's the only one who cares for the people of India and nobody else cares. And they put in money there. It's a public, it's a trust which is totally opaque, just like the electoral bonds. And now it turns out that the Comptroller and Auditor General of India will not be able to audit this particular fund. So I think these things happen when you feel that you have power and you can wield it any way you want, and you won't be held accountable. So that's where you are. You can distribute this money any way you want. I think we will be fighting for clarity and transparency of this particular fund. I think we want to know. We will ask questions about why, where the money is coming from and where is it going. I think that is reasonable, and I think the Congress Party and others, everybody should be asking questions about this. Then Sadia Rawa is asking, do you think most world governments or even India weren't prepared of experts? I've already said that yes, most governments were not prepared and India was not prepared. But some countries had more of a warning time than others did, and India was one of them. India started thinking more seriously about this, crisis in March. By that time, we wasted a lot of time with Mr. Trump's visit and all that stuff. So I think that was an opportunity lost. But then with the lockdown, another month of time, I'm now looking to see what the government of India and the governments in different states, what have they done to prepare for what is to come. And what is to come is basically the disease basically spreading, because containment only works up to a point. In order for you to deal with this crisis going forward, what you need is more testing. You need to be able to trace people who are infected. You need to be able to take the infected people and either quarantine them because they don't have very severe symptoms, or isolate them, or take them to the hospital, or take them to the to the ICUs, put them on ventilators as needed. You need a whole system for that. And by the way, if you isolate places and you think that this particular place is green, it's good to go. You don't need to kind of people can go on about their lives in this area versus this area which is red. This area is not good for any sort of activity. Then you could do something like that potentially, because we can't really have a lockdown in India for too long. And as it is, even during this lockdown, I've seen so many scenes where social distancing is just not possible. And so time will tell. I'm hoping that they've done their jobs, but something tells me that maybe they haven't. So let's hope for the best. Okay, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Dhananjay, can you tell me if we can can we close the session? Should we close the session? Manoj or Dhananjay, can you tell me? If I don't hear from anyone, I'm assuming that yes, I can. So I want to thank all of you, and I thank you. I thank Dhananjay and I thank Manoj for your help, and also to the Indian Overseas Congress for inviting me. Salman Soul signing out. Thank you guys. Bye.